There are far worse things facing man than death.
What's up, my Wizards Dev, SBMTG. We're a YouTube channel, I think. We got decks and stuff. Today, another double deck tech, 2 in a row. This is something that people have wanted in the comments for since Oath came out. They wanted me to update this deck, and I've been working on it since way before Oath came out, actually, since the spoilers started coming out. This is Black-White Allies. We're going to do a budget version and a competitive version. I know a lot of you prefer that I do it this way every single time, but it usually runs pretty low or pretty high on time, and me sitting here babbling probably not helping. The reason I wanted to do a double deck tech in the first place is because I feel like these two decks, the budget and competitive versions, play in some ways drastically differently and have different strategies. So I'm just going to do both of them. Why not? Why not do that? We're going to do a $25 to $35 on TCG player version of this deck, and then follow that up with a $125 to $175 version. Still a reasonable budget when you consider that there's decks with Jaces and Fetches that cost $1,000 in standard right now. Before I get started very quickly here, I just want to say that I gave you my email address back there so that you can send me questions for the 15,000 subscriber Q&A that I want to do. So just send me whatever you want me to talk about, and I'll do that. That's why I gave you that. Now, on to the decks and such. We're going to go ahead and start with the budget deck first. That's what we usually do. We're going to start with the creatures. We also normally do that. I don't see any reason to stop. We're going to play 23 creatures in the budget version of the deck, starting with probably the two most no-brainer inclusions. 4 copies of Kalastria Healer, along with the playset of Zulaport Cutthroat as well. Just, cool little parody with one another. Whenever a guy comes into play, you drain a life. Whenever a guy dies, you drain a life. Just really can do up to 10 damage and gain you 10 life over the course of a game. We're trying to go fairly wide and establish a good board position in both decks. So these can do a ton of damage and gain you a bunch of life over the course of the game. So we will play them. Continuing on with the 2 drops, 2 copies of Ayli Eternal Pilgrim. Yeah, that's not an ally, but it has so much synergy with what we're trying to do here that I want to do it. First of all, just being a 2-mana 2/3 Death Touch means that it helps us get a little bit later into the game, establish a good board position, make them slightly afraid to swing in with things. All of that is good when we're trying to get to the 5th, 6th turn and get set up here. So that's very important in and of itself. Now, the fact that it can gain us life is really good in this deck. Sorry for the 3 Ayli decks in a row. This isn't an Ayli deck, but 3 decks with Ayli in them in a row. It's fine. I love Orzhov. I hope you guys too. It's my favorite guild. Finish off the 2 drops here. 3 copies of Serene Steward, which you could play 4 copies of, but I don't necessarily want all of them. It's not like it's the weakest 2 drop ever. It's a great 2 drop. There'll be turns where we gain a life 2 or 3, maybe 4 times in that turn. So Serene Steward can be really good. It's just very mana intensive, So, I don't want to play the full 4, but you could if you wanted to. Still a very important creature for what we're doing in the deck. Just the 1 copy of Drana, Liberator, and Malakir in the deck, mostly for budgetary concerns, but it hasn't been that much of a thing. If we could play 2 copies, I would probably suggest playing 2 copies, but we don't attack all the time. We've got Captain's Clause that requires us to attack, but a lot of times we don't really care if we lose the guy that Creator's Clause is equipped to when he attacks, so long as he makes an ally and triggers all of our other things. So it's not like, we're not attacking for damage a lot of the time. We just want to establish board position, stall out, and win with drains. So Drana isn't necessarily amazing, but she's another way of buffing our guys and another way of ultimately winning the game. It's always good to have that, and I think it's worth $4 to $6 to include her in the deck. 2 copies of Lantern Scout in the deck. It's not as integral to our strategy as it looks. Obviously, this is drain and gain allies. We want to gain life. Lifelink looks good, but like I said with Drana, we're not swinging in all the time or anything, and Lantern Scout is only really desirable when we intend to swing in, So Lantern Scout's been good, don't get me wrong, especially with Cliffhaven Vampire. Really good synergy with that. But on the other hand, there are better cards we can play for the sort of strategy that I outlined a second ago. We want to establish board position, stall out, win with drains. And this is just a fairly offensive card because we're never going to need the lifelink on our opponent's turn. That'd be sweet if we did, but it's just not going to happen. So it loses a little bit of its relevance, but it's still a card that we want to play at least the 2 copies of. 4 whole copies of Drana's Emissary in the deck. It started off as a 2 of, quickly became a 4 of. The card sets up a lot of things for us before we even draw a card for the turn. That's awesome, I'll outline some of those things here in just a second, but Drana's Emissary just really stable, reliable life gain once a turn. That's good, Doesn't cost too much or anything. Just see, it's a fine card. And you could take out 1 copy and put in that 4 Serene Steward or a 2nd Drana if you were so inclined, but I really liked having 4 copies of this. It gets really good once you have multiples out. and 3 copies of Cliffhaven Vampire to finish off the creatures in the deck. For what we're trying to do, set up board stalls, drain for the win. This is very, very good. Blocks very, very well. Blocks, Manus Rider, Hangerback Walker tokens, a few other things that fly, very, very, very well. It doesn't die at least. And all the little incremental life that we're gaining every single turn, the card's really good with that. It's basically doubling the damage we deal off of draining life. And that's awesome, if it sits on the board for more than a turn or two, it's going to end up dealing like 6 or more extra damage. The card is fantastic. I'm serious. It turns out I love Cliffhaven Vampire. 5 spells in the deck, and they're all removal. We're playing 3 copies of Grasp of Darkness and 2 copies of Stasis Snare. Like I said in the Turbo Ayli video, we're gaining a lot of life, and we want some removal so that we can sustain that life total without having to expend chump blockers and stuff like that. Grasp of Darkness is really, really good early games. Fantastic early game card. And Stasis Snare takes out like literally everything late game at instant speed. Well, creatures, everything late game. So I think it's really important to play some removal, and this is probably the best options available to us. 4 copies of Retreat to Emeria. Almost every token deck in the format plays a playset of this card now. Because it's so good, everyone's learned how amazing it is. It's like a mini Gideon, But the good thing about it is that it turns turns where you just draw a land and you don't want to into a profitable turn. 4 Captain's Claws in the deck. We're going super wide in this deck. Just another way to go wide. We want the hell out of this card. 24 lands in the deck. The base won't cost you that much. You're not playing any fetches or any junk like that. So really reliable mana base. I probably wouldn't change it too much. Blighted Steppe has been freaking amazing. Here's the sideboard for us. There's probably not too much I have to go into here. It's just a lot of standard staple removal and stuff like that. But the Duress are in there. We have to play all those copies of Duress because our worst nightmare is mass removal, sweepers. And there's a ton of them in the format. Radiant Flames, Flame Tendrils, Languish, Planar Outburst, and even more than that, So we definitely want, Kozilek's Return, Crux of Fate. So we definitely have to be able to do something about sweepers. Duress is probably our best bet there. Our best butt. A race we need to play because we need to do something about Virulent Plague. That's also a card that hurts us quite a bit, especially in the second deck I'll show you. Aside from that, Hallowed Moonlight, company decks are making a comeback. The first 3 weeks of Standard, we've seen Bant Company place very high twice. We've seen Abzan Company place high. So Hallowed Moonlight will help out against that. Palace Siege might look weird. This is actually a fantastic card. Almost want to put it in the main deck. It either gets an ally back for us every turn, that'll make triggers, or it gives us, life gain, life drain every single turn. That'll also create triggers with Cliffhaven Vampire and Serene Steward. So the card's been really good, and I could actually see it maybe making the main deck, but I wouldn't want to play a bunch of copies of it. And here are the power rankings for the deck. A final score of 59, pretty good for a fairly cheap budget deck, And if you added the Drana, it might go up a point, due to offense going up a point. So maybe I can see that. The deck is really, really fun above all else. Especially once we establish our board position, we can do crazy stuff. Let me take you through a typical turn sequence late into the game. And this has happened a lot. I was going to say more than once. It actually happens kind of a lot once you're able to set up. You untap all your guys, your Drana's Emissary goes off during your upkeep. At that point, you can put a +1/+1 counter on a guy with Serene Steward. You'll deal with damage with Cliffhaven Vampire. You'll draw your card. You'll play a land. Sometimes that will activate your retreat to trigger your retreat to Emeria. You'll get an ally token. That will trigger your Kalastria Healer, thus triggering Serene Steward and Cliffhaven Vampire again. At that point, we can declare our attack steps, swing in with a guy, equipped with Captain's Claws, and then we'll get another ally. That'll trigger Kalastria Healer again, and thus also trigger Serene Steward and Cliffhaven Vampire. Like, these things happen, and they build upon one another all in one turn. It just reaches critical mass very, very quickly once we get set up. 5th, 6th turn, we've got the Vampire out, we've got a Healer out, a couple of other cards, But that's why we hate sweepers as much as we do. We really, really hate running up against sweepers. That's our #1 problem, because they don't allow us to remain set up. It's a huge issue for us. So if your local LGS is sort of, high on control and sweepers and stuff like that, I might not recommend this deck out of hand. But if it's not filled with a lot of aggro, especially, or filled with some mid-range decks, this is a great choice because we'll reach the mid-game, we'll achieve, some form of stall, and then we'll usually be able to win out, within a couple of turns off of drains. Aggro will drastically slow because of our life gain. And mid-range, we'll have some big guys. We have some removal to deal with that. We have chump blockers, and there are situations where when we chump block, it sets off Zulaport Cutthroat. That triggers everything else. So just swinging in even becomes a pain for them. So the deck is incredibly fun against certain decks, but does suffer against others, like every deck. But fun is the key here. If you like big, long, complex strings of activations and triggers, this is the one for you. Very, very fun deck. Let me move on to the competitive deck. Like I said, it'll cost you under $200 at maximum to make this deck, and most of that money is in the Gideons. But let me go ahead here and tell you that we're playing at least 1 or 2 common bonds between the decks. 4 of those, or at least 8 of those, being Kalastria Healer and Zulaport Cutthroat. Full play sets of those, just like the first deck. This is really the only thing we're doing in the way of gaining and draining. We don't have Emissary, Serene Steward, Cliffhaven Vampire. Not in this deck. We're mostly attacking for the win in this deck. But just like the first deck, these can deal a ton of damage and gain you a bunch of life over the course of the game. So I'm still going to play them because in this deck, we're more focused really around tokens. And they're all of our tokens that come into play are all allies. So they activate Kalastria Healer when they die. They trigger Zulaport Cutthroat. So yeah, I do still want to play sets of these. Our only other creature in the deck, this is where things deviate fairly wildly, are 2 copies of Drana. Drana much better in this deck. Like I just said, we're going super wide. We're swinging in for damage this time. So Drana just becomes instantly much better. This is actually one of 3 different buff all of our guys effects that we have in the deck, and with how wide we're going, that just gets ridiculous. So yeah, Drana is, I think, a must play in this version of the deck, but that's all 10 creatures right there. Well, if it's only got 10 creatures, how is it an allies deck? Like I said, bunch of cards create tokens for us. Now, it's going to deviate even more wildly, but stick with me. I've been testing this deck. It's changed a lot over the course of the last month or 6 weeks. And this is what I've landed on that has been the most successful. So bear with me and trust me. I've brought you a lot of good stuff before. I don't intend to lead you wayward now. We're playing 14 enchantments overall in this deck. Don't freak out yet, let me explain. We're playing 4 copies of Oath of Gideon, which is sort of like another creature drop. Creates 2 allies, triggers Kalastria Healer. That's really good. When those allies die, they trigger Zulaport Cutthroat, Really, when any creature dies, triggers Zulaport Cutthroat. They die pretty easily as chump blockers. Not only that, but we're obviously playing Gideon, like I've said in the deck. The card works so well with Gideon, It gives him an extra point of loyalty, allowing you to use his emblem the turn he comes into play and keep him on the battlefield rather than him dying from 0 loyalty. So, just all around great card here. We need the blockers, we need the triggers off of Kalastria Healer, and just works so well with Gideon. Yes, totally. We're also playing the by now standard playset of Retreat to Emeria. If you have multiple copies of this out, things get pretty freaking sick, like immediately. This card is great. And on some turns, if you have multiple copies, it's like way better than even Gideon. So just another Anthem effect, creates allies, that sets off, Kalastria Healer. So just, yeah. And some removal to round out all those enchantments. There's 14 of them. 3 copies of Silk Wrap, 3 copies of Stasis Snare. We need a little bit of removal, just like the first deck. Silk Wrap helps us out in the early game, and Stasis Snare in the later game. At instant speed, all of this is good. Removal's great. We should probably do it. A total of 8 artifacts in the deck. There are no just like normal spells. No instants, no sorceries, just enchantments, artifacts, and creatures in this one, guys. And those 8 artifacts, we're going to start with 4 copies of Captain's Claws. Just like the first deck, the card is extraordinarily potent, Swinging with a guy, you get a guy. That's good. We're doing a lot more swinging in this deck, which makes it mostly more relevant, We don't get, like, when Kalastria Healer triggers off of the creature, off the token, we won't get triggers off of, Cliffhaven Vampire or Serene Steward. But it's still very important because of how much swinging in we plan to do in the deck. Captain's Claw is just another way of making tokens and going wide. Let's play it. I have moved the 2 copies of Stoneforge Masterwork from the board of the first deck into the main of this deck. Again, we're swinging in a lot more. We're making a lot more tokens in this deck thanks to Gideon and his Oath. So, yeah, we can usually get, a giant bonus off of this. The biggest buff I've gotten off of Stoneforge Masterwork was +12/+12. That has happened. But you can usually count on, +3/3/4/4, +4, and maybe even a little bit higher than that. Reliably in this deck. So Stoneforge Masterwork has been really freaking good. I know I keep saying that about a lot of these cards, but the decks are just so synergistic with, the different themes that they're playing, that's all you can say about some of these is like, hey, look at this no-brainer thing we definitely play. To finish off the artifacts, they're all equipment. 8 artifacts, all of them equipment. We're playing 2 copies of Helm of the Gods. What a weird card, right? Like I said, though, 14 enchantments, and I have gotten as much as +5/+5 off of Helm of the Gods, all for an investment of 1 to cast, 1 to equip. Couldn't be any better, I've had people that have played against the deck or at least seen my concept for the deck tell me that, I should run 4 Helm of the Gods in the deck. But I don't know if it's there yet. I like Stoneforge Masterwork for all intents and purposes a little bit more, but I like to do, 2 and 2 because we're not playing all the creatures in the world, we're not playing all the enchantments. But we'll get pretty big buffs off of both of them. And Helm of the Gods is just so cheap, I really couldn't pass it up, and it has been fantastic. We get pretty good buffs off of it, at least +3/+3 for a very cheap investment. So play the card, I promise, it's good. Before I move on to the lands, I'll address a card or two that I didn't play. I didn't play Stoneforge Acolyte in the deck, and I didn't play Stonehaven Outfitter in the deck either. You could play these. I don't know if 8 equipments is enough to really justify Outfitter, but it may be. I haven't tried it. Could be good. Could be good. Haven't tried it. Been mostly going with tokens, that theme in the deck. And Stoneforge Acolyte, I also think you could play. I just don't know what to take out. But I'd like to play maybe a 2 of Acolyte in the deck because we could easily get its cohort and get some amazing equipment off of it. So I could see playing Acolyte, but I haven't made the slot yet because I have no clue what to take out of the deck. Help me out with that if you feel like it. Here's the mana base for the competitive deck. You'll notice right away that it's the exact same mana base. Blighted Steppe is still really good in this deck, even better because of all the tokens that we're making. Just trust me, we're making a ton of tokens. Aside from that, we don't have to go crazy with a bunch of fetches and here's a way that we can fetch up a green source that has a white source attached to it if we play this fetch land. We don't have to do that. The deck is perfectly reliable with this mana base right here. Here's the sideboard for this version of the deck. You'll notice it's not really that much different, We're just not playing Stoneforge Masterwork. There's a couple other things. Palace Siege isn't in this sideboard, But aside from that, we still need all the Duresses. They're just incredibly good against the sweepers that we hate as much as we do. I've mostly just used the opportunity to put Transgress the Mind in this sideboard. And we could put it in the first sideboard too, because it's also good against all the sweepers in the format. So if you want to put it in the first deck, you could probably do that too. And here are your power rankings for this competitive version. A final score of 68. Very respectable score, especially for a deck that doesn't cost some millions of dollars. The 1% deck, So this deck is actually really, really fun, just like the first deck. Although I think the first deck has a bigger fun factor. This deck doesn't have the complex strings of the first deck, but it's still more reliable on the whole, I would say. A little bit more resilient, plays some more powerful cards, gets way wider in the scheme of the game. So there's definitely different philosophies at play here. All depends on what you want to do. You want to go wide and swing in with a million guys? Let's play the competitive version. You want to gain all the life and get into these awesome strings where this triggers, so that triggers, so that triggers, so that triggers. Play the first deck. They're both perfectly viable in my opinion, although the second deck is probably a smidge more powerful. I say a smidge by 9 points more powerful. That is all I have for now. I get to get into some stuff that I'm really, really excited about making coming up here soon. I want to make Bant Company. I want to make Omnath. I know a lot of people want me to make that too. And a few other decks. Sphinx's Tutelage, something I'm excited about and been working on super hard. So let me know what you want to see. As usual, anything is fair game for me. Well, yeah, pretty sure that's it for now. If you enjoyed the content, as usual, smash the like button. It takes 2 seconds and really helps me a lot, both emotionally and with my YouTube status. Share the video. That's always cool. I know a lot of people don't do it, but it's awesome when you do it. Really, that helps me out more than like anything. Comment. That really helps me out mentally more than anything. And then sub, because that's just really a nice thing to do. I know a lot of people don't sub to YouTube channels. I get that. I understand, but it really mean a lot to me if you did. But in any case, I'm Deb from SBMTG. Thanks for watching, my wizards. Sincerely, thank you.